What is up, guys? It is Joique from QuadHunting, and today I'm actually making a video. It's been a while. Hi. So, I was reading through an article earlier today that caught my interest, and it was talking about how the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive trio of Rothlesberger, Bell, and Antonio Brown are the best offensive trio in the NFL history. Went to the comments, saw that people were saying that the 90s Cowboys actually had a better trio, which was Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Irvin, talking about how they were better, and it was a lot of people just going back and forth. And so I can't really speak much to that because I don't know if I'm not a fan of either team, so I've never really been interested in that. But it did pique my interest in which Lions teams have had the best offensive trios. So I went ahead and started digging and compiled a list here of the top 5 years the offense in the Lions offensive trios, which years were the best for them. And I did not limit it to just quarterback, running back, wide receiver. I have a couple of them that are quarterback, running back, wide receiver. Then I have a couple more that are quarterback, 2 wide receivers, and a running back in the honorable mentions. There are honorable mentions for the 4th player of that year. I'm going to preface this also by saying 2011 did not make the list, even though Matthew Stafford and Calvin Johnson both had great years. There really wasn't a solid number 3 option. I really didn't feel like it. I mean, there was a solid number 3 option, but there also was a really solid number 4 and number 5 to where I had trouble picking out which one could have been the number 3 and then which one would have been the honorable mention, because all their stats are pretty similar. So I left 2011 off the list, even though that was the Lions' best offensive year as of late. And I went with looking at which 3. I wanted to get 3 solid players and then honorable mention. So I left 2011 off the list. But yeah. So this is the top 5 offensive trio years for the Detroit Lions. I'm going to start off at the bottom, number 5, with 2012. This was a year it almost successfully blocked out of my brain until going back and looking at this. This is coming off of the heels of 2011 when we went 10-6, lost to the Saints in the wild card, but we ended up going 4-2 the next year. There really wasn't like a whole big reason to why. We didn't lose a lot of players. We had the big pieces of the team intact. It was, I think if you could point at anything, it was the mismanagement of our cap space, where we weren't able to sign some impact players we needed to fill some holes. We were filling the holes with mediocre to below average players and relying a lot on scrap heap signings, and it just didn't work out for the Lions. So starting off for the 2012 Lions, the 3 we're going to be looking at are Matthew Stafford, Mikel Leshoure, and Calvin Johnson. And then the honorable mention is Joique Bell. The Lions' offense was, looking at the stats, you'd think the Lions' offense is pretty good this year. Not good enough, and the stats are kind of deceiving. Start off with Stafford. He threw 9.8% completion, 435 completions on 727 attempts for 4,967 yards. He almost went back-to-back 5,000 years here between 2011 and 2012. He threw 20 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. That is a huge amount of interceptions. But he ended up with a 79.8 passer rating, which is definitely not where he wants to be. Mikel Leshoure then was the running back I had picked for this one, and he had 215 attempts for 798 yards, 3.7 yards a carry, 57 yards a game, 9 touchdowns, 34 receptions, 214 yards, and no receiving touchdowns. I had forgotten Mikel Leshoure actually had a pretty decent year this year. Yeah, his yards a carry aren't that great, but there wasn't a lot of expectations on him coming back from that Achilles injury. It is known to take some burst away, so that could be an explanation for the yards a carry. But almost 800 yards and 9 touchdowns. He was at least a solid, I'm going to say probably better option than what we have right now running the ball, with Abdullah, Riddick, and Tion Green as rushing anyways goes. I'm not including passing into that, because if you're including the passing game in that, I'm taking Riddick over Leshoure for sure. But yeah, Leshoure didn't really have, honestly, as bad as I thought. And then Calvin Johnson this is the year Calvin broke the single season receiving yardage record. So that almost got this team in here just on that alone. He had caught 122 catches for 1,964 yards, averaging a 16.1 yards a reception number. That is insane. He had 5 touchdowns, which, yeah, that number was really low. So then my honorable mention was Do It All Joique Bell. He had 82 carries for 414 yards. He averaged 5 yards a carry. Wondered why he didn't get the ball more that year. I know this is kind of the start of the Joique Bell era in Detroit. He averaged 25.9 yards a game for 3 touchdowns. And then he was extremely valuable in the passing game. 52 receptions for 485 yards, an outlet there for Stafford. So that team comes in number 5. It was a pretty down year for the Lions. I did take record into account on this, so they're coming at number 5. Going to number 4 now is the 2013 Lions squad, who went 9-7. This is the year that they were 6-3 at one point, and then proceeded to lose their last 6. Lost 6 out of the last 7, I should say. This is the year that Jim Schwartz got canned, and this is it was Rodgers who had gotten hurt, and the division was wide open. Everyone thought the Lions could finally step up, take the division. They fell apart at the end, and then the Vikings or I think it was the Packers came back and won it. Kind of similar to what happened this year. Rodgers goes down, division's wide open, and then the Vikings come in and just stamp it all out. Vikings are good this year, though, so no dissing there. So this year, Stafford had completed 371 passes out of 634 for 58.5% completion, even worse than 2012. 29 touchdowns, better number. 19 interceptions, worse number than 2012. But he did those 9 touchdowns compared to the 2 more interceptions, gave him an 84.2 passer rating. So it bumped it up 5 points, but that's not interception number is still way too high. Reggie Bush, this is the last time the Lions have had a 1,000-yard rusher in a season. Reggie Bush got 1,006 yards on 223 attempts, 4.5 yards a carry, 71.9 yards a game, 4 touchdowns, adding 54 catches for 506 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is insane. When I'm going to skip, it's Calvin, obviously the last part of the trio, but I'm going to skip down to the honorable mention here. When you look at Reggie's numbers and then you can then add Joique Bell, the honorable mentions, he had 166 attempts for 650 yards, 8 touchdowns, and then he also added 53 catches for 547 yards. This was, I think, I can't remember if it was the first. It was a big moment because it was not happened often where 2 running backs on the same team finished with over 500 rushing yards, both of them, and 500 receiving yards, with Bush's 1,006 yards 6 yards rushing, and then you got Joique's 650 yards, and then they both had over 500 receiving yards, which is just insane to think about. So, where are those running backs on this team? Then, as I mentioned, Calvin was the last part of the trio. He had 84 catches for 1,492 yards, averaging an insane 17.8 yards of reception for 12 touchdowns. Calvin turned it around after not being able to get in the end zone, added 7 more touchdowns than he did in 2012. So that was great to see Calvin getting in the end zone more often. This was the start of the churn. Mayhew was kind of seen as a little more evil and not as good at his job, but it was definitely better than 2012. Not as good as a season we're going to talk about in a little bit. We're going to start off now. We're going to move to number 3, talking about the 1997 Detroit Lions team. This is the year that Barry Sanders, the really good running back we had in history, broke over 2,000 yards. He is the first part of this trio, and 335 attempts. He had 253 yards, averaging 6.1 yards a carry, which is insane. Even more insane is the 128.3 yards a game. He had 11 touchdowns, added 33 catches for 305 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had 2,300 all-purpose yards, over 2,300 all-purpose yards. Crazy. Then we go to the quarterback, which was Scott Mitchell that year, 293 completions on 509 attempts. He averaged 57.6 completion percentage for 3,484 yards, 19 touchdowns, 14 interceptions for a 79.6 rating. You go to the wide receiver, the best wide receiver on the Lions, probably that 90s decade, was Herman Moore, 104 receptions, 1,293 yards, averaged 12.4 yards a catch, and had 8 touchdowns. Honorable mention that year is Johnnie Morton, who had 80 catches for 1,057 yards, and he got 13.2 yards a catch for 6 touchdowns. That is the last time the Lions have had 2 wide receivers go over 1,000 yards. No. It was the last time until 2014 that the Lions have done that. Yes, because... Well, talking about 2014, let's go ahead and mention it. That is number 2 on this list. And mentioning that when 2 wide receivers went over 1,000 yards that year, it was Golden Tate and Calvin Johnson, who both make this list. The honorable mention is going to be Joique Bell. So 2 wide receivers on this list. We go to Matthew Stafford, who had 363 completions, 102 attempts, bumping up to over 60 yards or 60 completion percentage there. Good job. It was a 60.3. Still not great, but it's definitely better than throwing in the 50s like he had been. He had 4,257 yards, 22 touchdowns, 12 interceptions for 85.7 rating, which is great. You go to Golden Tate, who had 99 catches for 1,331 yards, and he got 13.4 yards of reception for 4 touchdowns. This is the year. This is the first year we had Tate on the Lions, if I'm not mistaken. And it proved just how good this offense could be if we had another wide receiver that could complement Calvin Johnson. Great. And the Lions ended up going 11-5. They lost to Dallas in the wild card. We don't want to talk about that. So moving on to Calvin Johnson. He had 71 catches for 1,077 yards. He averaged 15.2 yards a reception for 8 touchdowns. Our honorable mention, as I mentioned, was Joique Bell, 223 attempts for 860 yards, 3.9 yards a carry. He averaged 57.3 yards a game, 7 rushing touchdowns on the ground. He added 34 catches and 22 yards and a touchdown. That's the closest the Lions have been to a 1,000-yard season from a running back since 2013. It's the closest, and we were 140 yards away. So that streak's not ending this year. No, as I'm going to mention later, comparing those seasons to all these seasons we're talking about to this year, it's not going to happen. Somebody would have to go off and rush for average 250 yards a game. Abdullah would have to go off and average 250 yards a game over these last 2 games. I guess it's still possible, but not very probable at all. So, moving on to the best season by an offensive trio for the Lions. It's 1995. The Lions went 10-6, lost in the wild card to Philadelphia, 58-37. Wow. Go to quarterback, and it's going to be Scott Mitchell again for 346 completions on 583 attempts, 59.3 completion percentage, 4,338 yards, 32 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and a 92.3 passer rating. That's the highest passer rating we've mentioned so far. So this is hands down the best season by a quarterback in these offensive trio years. I mean, if you wanted to take, I'm not saying it's the best season in Lions history for a quarterback. It's the best season that I've looked at for these offensive trios. We go to running back, which is Barry again for 314 attempts. He had 1,500 yards, square even, and had 4.8 yards a carry, 93.8 yards a game, 11 touchdowns. He also added 48 catches for 398 yards and a touchdown. The last piece of this trio is again Herman Moore. He had 123 catches for 1,686 yards, 13.7 yards of reception for 14 touchdowns. His 123 receptions would stand as the record for catches, I think, for a couple years, and then it was broken. I know Marvin Harrison, I think, is the one that holds it now. I'm pretty positive of that. Not very positive. Pretty sure of it. And the honorable mention that year was Brett Perriman, and this is the last time the Lions have had 100 catch receivers in a season. That's what I meant to say when I was talking about Herman Moore and Morton. I knew there was something in there wide receivers hadn't done since then, and this is that. The 100 receptions in a single season. Brett Perriman had 108 catches for 1,488 yards, 13.8 yards of reception, and 9 touchdowns. That's just insane. You have two wide receivers put their receiving yards together. You're over already 3,000 yards. Talk about a 1-2 punch. And then Johnnie Morton was the third guy there. So, we're looking at all this, and we want to see how it compares to this year's Lions. So, I did the math, which I had to take their stats, what they have now, divided by 14, because that's how many games they've played, and then that gave me the single game average, and then I had to multiply that by 2, and then add that to what they have now to get the numbers. So, you can do this on your own, if you want. The 2017 Lions arguably have a pretty good trio. No good running back, but if you look at just 3 offensive players, they have it. You have Matthew Stafford on. He's right now, if he finishes out the season the way he's been playing, will have 380 completions on 573 attempts for a high in this list of 66.3 completion percentage, 4,480 yards, 28 touchdowns, and so far the lowest interception rate we're talking about here with 10. Which would also put the highest quarterback rating of 99.1 on the board. Like I said, there's no running back, so it's our 2 top wide receivers with Golden Tate. If he continues to play the way he's been playing, he's going to finish with 94 receptions, 1,011 yards, averaging a 10.8 yards a catch, and 5 touchdowns. Marvin Jones will then finish with 62 receptions, 1,108 yards for a ridiculous 18-yard reception average, and 9 touchdowns. Our running backs would have to go crazy to become an honorable mention on this list. I couldn't pick between Abdullah or Riddick because if you added their receiving to their rushing, their numbers were pretty close. And with Riddick being injured right now, with a wrist injury, who knows if he even plays the rest of the season. So there's always that. So that's the Lions and their best offensive trios. We have number 1, the 1995 squad, number 2, the 2014 squad, number 3, the 97 squad, number 4, the 13 squad, and then number 5, the 12 squad. I think easily if the Lions, if the trio I've talked about, Stafford, Tate, and Jones, can finish out the season with these stats, that'll easily bump them into number 5, if not number 4. You could argue that. Probably be number 5, though. Put them at the number 5 best season by an offensive trio for the Lions. So, it'll be interesting to see how the season finishes out. I'm hoping to be a lot more active now. We'll have to see. Hoping I'm going to get a preview out this week for the Lions-Bengals. The Lions need to get this win to bump them to 9-6. And then they go into Lambeau with the playoff hopes still alive if they can win this and get some help along the way. So, probably get a preview out for that. Hopefully get a recap out for that game as well. And then I'm going to try to start up those top 5, bottom 5 lists again. This is kind of a teaser for that. I'm not going to really talk about the bottom 5 because that's a lot of stats to dig through. And I want to stick away from like the old years because if you get back in the 50s, then it's easily those ones. But those teams were successful. Because I was looking at just some numbers from there, and yeah, guys throwing 23 interceptions, and they're in the Hall of Fame. So, yeah, hopefully I'll feel better too. My voice probably sounds weird because I'm not feeling the greatest. But I wanted to get this video out. Thought it was kind of cool, kind of interesting. Hopefully, there'll be more following it. So, if you like the video, go ahead and leave a like down below. Go ahead and leave a comment down below there as well. You can hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on whenever I decide to put videos out. And go ahead and hit that bell icon, and you can get notifications whenever I post a video. So, I will see you guys all next time.